And that's how I got that amazing photo. So, it's time for our panel. We knew that. Welcome to Wizard World Virtual Experience, Superman Breakdown from KRYPTON to Snyder Cut, Superman and Lois, Homelander and Beyond. I am Dr. Travis Langley, and these are our fellow psych geeks. Who are all of you people? Start with Dad Brady. Eric.
I'm Dr. Eric Wesselman. I'm a social psychologist at Illinois State University. I've contributed to most of the books in the popular culture psychology series.
Cool. I am Dr. Harpreet Malla. I'm a registered psychologist right now in Shanty, Orange County. And I love nerd stuff. So that's why I'm here.
I'm Dr. Scott Jordan, aka Zombie Scotty, cognitive psychologist, philosopher from Illinois State University. Like Eric, I contribute to the books that Travis edits, and I'm thrilled to be here.
I'm Travis Adams, the only non-doctor on the panel. I contribute to the series of books also. I'm also a veteran, and I work with veterans at the VA in San Diego, readjustment disorders.
I'm Dr. Asher Johnson. I've contributed to a couple of the books in the Pop Psych series. And I am also a big nerd, especially into Superman.
Dr. Angela Petersen. I am also a pretty big nerd, but developing. But I'm a clinical psychologist. I have my own practice. I also work as a clinical director for a community mental health center. And I'm just really excited to be here today.
Hello, Wizard World. My name is Dr. Billy San Juan. I am a therapist, writer, raconteur, and I have written in the Sterling Publishing line of popular psychology books, and I've also been on creative text teams for Magic the Gathering. I'm very, very excited to talk about the Dark Knight Superman.
Thank you all for joining me on so many things along the way, and thank you out there on YouTube and Twitch and Facebook and wherever you might happen to see this. Thank you for joining us. Some of you've been with us every week along the way, and we really appreciate that. And to our newcomers out there, our newcomers here, Angela and Harpreet, thank you both. And so our topic today grows out of last week because we talked about the Snyder Cut, the Zack Snyder's Justice League, and we listed some other things he and Whedon had done, but by gosh, we stayed on Justice League that whole time. The whole time for Wizard. And so let's stick it with Superman a little because gosh, I have no problem talking about Batman. Does anybody who watched our after show on the Comic Con Fusion channel on YouTube discover, ask me a question about Batman and I'll just keep talking. So why has Superman been so dadgum popular? Why has Superman lasted since 1938? What is it about this character? Any of you?
He is aspirational. I think Superman, right, is the bar that we all want to hold ourselves to. And I asked my mom about this last night because she is how I became a Superman fan. She is the biggest Superman fan and, you know, just always views him as this like the hero that always saves the day beyond all the other superheroes. And for her, it is his indestructible goodness.
It's so true. He represents what we can be. A lot of times Batman and other superheroes represent who we are or what we wish we were. And to piggyback off of Dr. Malla's point, Superman represents what everyone can be and what they can achieve.
I also think that Superman represents that inner alien in each of us and how we put on maybe this Clark Kent human disguise to fit in so that people don't really know the real us. Even for him, it's a little bit more altruistic than that on many points, not all points, but many points it's altruistic. And his alter ego, Clark Kent, is really a huge connection to Superman. And I'm agreeing with both Dr. Malla and Millicent.
That's
okay, how does this alien who can leap tall buildings, outrun a train and so forth, how does that represent what we can be?
So I think it's the fact that he always does the right thing, right? There's never a moment in which he's not selfless, thinking about everyone else and figuring out how to maximize, like, you tell me those people can't be saved, I will figure it out, right? And I think that just pure white, clean, pure goodness, right, is Superman. That is just completely untainted. And so I think that is something that we all try to be, right? How can I be my best self? How can I be my most perfect version of who I am? And I think that is Superman.
And you see that in like the first episode of Superman and Lois, where it's like talking about the kids and how much he sacrifices to even be around his kids because he's out saving everybody else. So it's very selfless.
He's also restraint. For someone who can do basically anything from super strength to invincibility to shooting lasers out of his eyes, he could be bad, he could be evil, he could do whatever he wanted, but it's because of his upbringing that he chooses to be good, and he ends up being more human than most humans.
And he is acutely aware of his vulnerabilities, and rather than trying to hide from them or mask them, he embraces them in a way which can be tragic at times, as if anybody who's followed Superman, just like I know I wasn't part of last week's meeting, but Lois being the key. And I think that everyone who's ever been in love, we fall vulnerable to that. Not many of us are willing, or many people have been too wounded to fall deeply in love the way he's fallen in love with Lois. And that love for her and for his earthly parents has kept him compassionate to this horrible, evil human race, weak human race that is often criticized within the comic book world.
And for me, I think this is what he's one thing that's endearing to a lot of people, is his relationship with Lois, his relationship with his earthly parents. You mentioned the term vulnerability. We all need someone to connect with at the deepest levels, to be vulnerable, to get solid emotional support. And he's got a really complicated set of self-concepts that he has to juggle, right? And with his earthly parents, or after he comes out to Lois and they start a relationship, these are the people he can be his complete self with, right? Every other time, whether he's in his hero mode or whatever, he has to be masking some aspect of himself. He can be completely authentic with those individuals.
Yeah, to follow up on Dr. Malla's point about him being aspirational, I think there's also a bit of unattainability attached to that aspiration. I mean, the fact that he's from a different planet kind of allows us to kind of sticks. We want to be better, we want to be good, and yet somehow we know that we have to live in the world that we live in. So I think there's always that little edge of unattainability attached to his aspirational side that lets us read him like that.
Kind of like that spiritual aspect, right? Like he might be most commonly whatever religion anybody might follow, whoever that that highest level of whatever religion or tradition you follow. And Christianity with Jesus Christ, or Buddhism with the Buddha, and so on and so forth. You're right, there is that unattainability, but there's that constant striving for.
Yep.
And just watching how Superman and Clark sort of deal with these impossible situations, always wanting to do the right thing, but somebody gets hurt along the way, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'd never considered that before, but that's a fascinating concept.
Also, it's an interesting point you make about him being the ideal for whatever religion. So no, Man of Steel, and before that, Superman Returns, both did some rather blatant Christ-like comparisons.
Mm-hmm.
But he was created by two Jewish boys. His
Mhm.
origin is Moses sci-fi,
Right.
and so he's. But the way Asher put it was very nicely that he's whatever the ideal is. And that even ties into that issue of the upbringing, because we're constantly, Billy, I do see you staring up at me. And okay, he is the ideal for whatever culture, and in his upbringing, because we mentioned it, we've hit on that one, and some of the people talking to us on Twitter have hit on that one. Value of a good upbringing being an important part of the Superman lesson.
Mhm.
That he becomes the champion of whatever values he's raised with. So if he's raised by good people, he'll be good. He gets the best parents in Kansas, he'll be a great person. He's raised by Lionel Luthor on the Smallville version of Earth 2, he'll be bad. Angela, you had something you were going to say?
Yeah, I really liked Smallville for that, because it did show that explicitly in a number of episodes, not just in terms of Lionel Luthor, but also like very specific episodes where his powers transferred to another student. And because that student, that young person who was just a freshman in high school, had a really abusive father, like it was a totally different outcome for him, as opposed to, Clark, who had, Jonathan Kent and Martha Kent really guiding him in terms of understanding his powers and the responsibility that went with them.
I would love to use this opportunity to pivot to what if he had no parents, and then Homelander, because I've been
Right.
salivating
You
to
remember what I
talk
said?
about
Let's wait till the last half to get to Homelander.
Oh, I knew it. Okay, fine.
It was a good segue, but yeah, no.
It was nice.
This,
I tried so hard, you guys.
This goes to
We got-
nurture versus nature, though. But go ahead.
Well, and then also we got a question here, or more of a comment from Kal-El of Krypton 71. Been looking forward to this panel. Thank you. Superman has always been a beloved character to me as a child of interracial adoption who grew up in a small agrarian town in the Midwest. I really connected with the character, particularly when John Byrne rebooted the character. Now, how many of us know what we're talking about when we say John Byrne rebooted the character? Okay, mid 80s, Crisis on Infinite Earths merged the universes, the multiverse into one world. Before that, Superman had always been this two-part character. Public Superman and public Clark Kent. But you didn't usually see somebody who just related to him as a person. Even among his fellow superheroes, where they're all there as superheroes, a bit more. But when John Byrne, what he did, a change he made was they had it that Clark's parents were still alive, the Earth parents, John and Martha Kent. They were old, because it always been since Action Comics #1, they died before he became Superman. And even in the Superboy comics, they hung around for a little while, but they still had to die before Superboy became Superman. And once they were added to the equation, you then had a three-part character: public Superman, public Clark, and then the guy that he really was. He'd been raised by these. So for y'all, and somebody on Twitter had asked this too for the panel, who's the real Superman?
all of them. I mean, all of us.
all aspects of it.
All of us have multiple identities. I can collectively call them all Scott, but I would argue I'm different in different contexts. So yeah.
We are all an infinite amount of variables in a finite space.
Yeah, it's that interaction, right? And it's about those appropriate values. And, all these studies where you have different parts of the brain that's damaged, are you still that person? Yeah, but now you have this other added flavor to whatever that is, or missing flavor, and with the frontal lobes or whatever and stuff like that. And so, some people say, when you're drunk, are you really exposing who you are as a person now that your filters are gone, or is it not you as a person? And I say with us, when we have our filters, that is part of us, because we are choosing and deciding what we want to go on in that moment, how we want to be perceived, how we want to not hurt someone or whatever. That is part of us, because we learned those filters are what we learned along the way.
I think that's part of the appeal of Superman's tension between his identities, is we put way too much pressure on ourselves to know who we are and to be one thing. And we don't allow ourselves to think of ourselves as multiple people, multiple types of things. And so watching Superman have that unattainable, non-stoppable tension, just that's who he is. I think coming to grips with that about ourselves is not a bad idea, right? Give ourselves a degree of freedom to actually be diverse within ourselves is not an unhealthy way to go.
And I think that that's one thing I like about the post-burn reboot, right? When his parents are active parts of his life throughout his development, is they allow him to just sort of they keep him grounded, right? Because when we think about our self-concepts, we have who we want to be, but we also have who we think others want us to be, right? In the case of Superman, he's trying to be all things to all people, essentially, right? He's got this public face that even he can't necessarily always be there, right? He struggles with those limitations, and so I think his parents they're there to kind of be like, hey, let's bring it back and let's ground yourself a little bit, metaphorically speaking.
I actually love what you said. And then that makes me think of the original tweet. I think it was a tweet. Basically, right, talking about how that interplays with culture and code switching, right? Like, am I going to be, so as an Indian immigrant, right? Am I going to be like the very desi side of myself, or am I like the cool Americanized side of myself? Or, and then there's a million others, right? Am I the psychologist side of myself? Am I like the nerdy side of myself, right? And all these different identities and what we learn to hide away because it's not acceptable, or amplify because it's getting us places.
Yeah, I think you get to see like that fluidity of all three going interchangeably, right? If we look at the parents with Clark, the reporter, and Superman, is they all give him a piece. They fulfill some type of value to his system that was instilled from Martha and Jonathan at a young age.
Yeah, Kal-El of Krypton 71 weighed in on the issue of who's the real character. Under Byrne, the equation got flipped. He made it so that Clark Kent is the real persona, and Superman is the mask he wears, which is kind of the opposite of Batman. I can talk for a while on the Batman thing, as you know. And the movie Kill Bill Volume 2. How many of you saw that? Most of you,
yes.
all of you. All right.
Fantastic.
For the audience members who don't know, there's a point where Bill is going onto this talk about how with Superman, it's flipped, that Superman is the real character and Clark Kent is his view of humanity, what weak, pitiful things he thinks they are. And you don't have to agree with Bill, but it's interesting that he thought of it that way. And I think there is a degree to which some writers have definitely written it that way. I honestly think that the original creators saw a whole lot of the Clark Kent side as themselves, and Superman was this fantasy manifestation. It's like, yes, I'm this, but I'm also secretly this. And so we may not have Superman if Jerry Siegel had been able to get more dates in high school.
That scene in
The
Kill Bill is
Superman
one of
3, the battle between Clark and Superman, Clark ultimately wins. And I really liked that because I kind of viewed it as Clark Kent sort of being the anchoring point for Superman, reminding Superman, because it's very easy to get this big, huge ego and become this gigantic narcissist. And, Clark Kent, he gets kind of bullied and stuff. And like, Billy said earlier, he can just fry people with his eyeballs. No problem. Boom. And he holds back, and he does it with this intention on, I want to see who needs help. And so there's this part, as we're all talking about how we're trying to figure out who ourselves are and what aspects of ourselves are fully influencing ourselves. There's also this other like super ego piece where he's aware of what's truth versus what his own reality is. And he's always on target with his morals. And I
think to that, he's actually being more honest with himself than most of us are. He knows what part of himself is a public act. And so he's got those more divided. Sam Carrico, who was on our panel last week. Hi, Sam. Welcome back. He's just that eager to be with us. Commented that Superman's upbringing being important is also part of the Rent's son story, I think.
Yes.
And I want to get into... We obviously have to get into these issues of those other ones, which we already tried to, and never mind waiting as long as I wanted to, because people want to talk about these other ones. Sam, the Red Sun storyline, what if Superman had been raised in communist Russia? And just like whether those other versions, he becomes the champion of the values that he's raised with. So that is actually one consistent thing about his character. So it's not, I don't think it's all nature on the nature versus nurture issue, because or as all nurture on the nature versus nurture, because usually we look at him as a case of nurture. Whoever raises him, that's whose champion he's going to be, but it's still within him to want to embody their values.
I do think that we talked earlier about him being sort of the peak of any given religion needs. I do think in the United States, where we're hyper individualist, that he is sort of the embodiment of the good individualist in an individualist culture. And I wonder how much, when we end up writing narratives of him being raised in other cultures, we're still projecting the value of individualism onto assessing the quality of the character he would become in that other culture. Right. So it just seems to me that our sort of individualism seems to run through the way we look at the nurture part of how these characters become who they are.
Well, I wonder, like, if he was to go into like the Fortress of Solitude and hear Jor-El talk to him, if he was in the red, and what that communication would be like, what that message would be like, and the dichotomy within himself on what that would cause.
So what is the nature of Superman if we strip away the nurture?
That he's got this innate desire to live up to the ideals. Every single version of him, he goes along with the ideals he's raised with. And that's not true of everybody.
And he's a loyalist. He's very loyal.
Alex,
also,
go ahead. No, go ahead.
One last little thing. Yeah, I think also the fact that as a man, right, he is the most powerful man and still values introspection and family connections and vulnerability. And like Fortress of Solitude, what do you think that is, right? Like, I'm going to take some me time, right? So I love that Superman also engages in all of that while still being the peak masculine, peak hero kind of figure. I love that so much.
He's definitely he's a template for healthy masculine narratives.
Yeah.
Everything that he does, everyone gets an idea of what a man, quote unquote, shouldn't be. A man should be a provider. A man should be a protector. And this is and those values, those narratives that were fed, can oftentimes be taken to the extreme. How can you protect someone if they die? You can't. So now you're stuck with a lot of guilt that you can't resolve, a lot of shame. How do you provide if if the job market is down? You can't. It's hard. Superman is the template for how to be a man in a healthy, adaptive way in a society where sometimes a lot of the male villains take those masculinity concepts to the extreme.
Why is it that the Superman pastiches, such as, say, Homelander, these various characters tend to be stupid and or evil?
So, as I said before, I've been waiting for this one. And I think the answer is toxic positivity, right? Because we keep raving about Superman is the most good and Superman does this and this and this, and that is all true, right? But when we mere mortal humans try to do anything like that, what would happen, right? And I think it's too much pressure, and too much pressure without any coping or right. We took away all the stuff I was just talking about before. Now he doesn't have the wonderful parents who, regularly come get him back to center. He doesn't have all that care. He doesn't even have a Lois, right? And so that is why I think Homelander becomes exactly what we all fear in someone that powerful, which is this veneer of perfect, because we all have that veneer of perfect that we can perform, and then what he actually is and some of his base impulses, and what happens when you don't kind of air those out. Sometimes there's no airtime for that, and then they just kind of boil over.
I really like what you said. I think it goes back to the Kill Bill moment, because I think when he's trying to tell her the real you is your power, right? And there are a lot of people in our cultures wanting to bring out their power. And when we put them in a space of you have to do it this way to be right and to be good, we basically deny them all the space they need to be able to actually express their power. So I think these more recent versions of Superman are sort of examining what it means to be good, right? And who gets to say what good is. And were things pretty just much more normatively clear in earlier, more white driven times in this culture, when it was clear that's what we should be. As diversity has more voice, I'm not so sure that we're all going to call the same thing good.
You know,
Yeah.
if we look at Homelander, for instance, right? Because he's a mix of really Captain America and Superman. He has this super serum that boosts him up, and just like Captain America, you know, if you're good, you get you're gonna be ultra good. If you're bad, your bad's gonna come out, and we see that with Homelander because his bad comes out in private, but he puts on that face, just like Happy said, with the veneers, right? Because he has this facade because it gives him more power, because it earns him respect and people bow down to him.
I also think that one big difference is Superman already has this level of self-acceptance. So like the truly humble, the truly confident people are the ones who they have nothing to prove. And if you think about people in your own life who have nothing to prove, they have this self-confidence and acceptance where they actually truly are humble. They're just okay with themselves making a mistake or something. They might be hard on themselves, but they don't have to tear other people down. And even within our own families, maybe as psychologists or social workers or whatever, and we can run a group therapy session, and we set ourselves apart because we know we're not really part of the group, we're facilitating something, but we go home to our families, like our relatives, our siblings and parents, whatever, aunts and uncles, there might be some dysfunctions, and it's harder to kind of pull ourselves out. We might find ourselves being a little bit more part of that, and then battling within ourselves, like, hey, we know better than this. This is a cognitive distortion going on that we should not be. And so I think with Homelander, he battles that because he knows he is a human. And there is this, he's less objectively connected. Superman's more objectively connected to us. And that being said, I think Homelander, and I agree with you, Travis, that he does have that Captain America piece to him. I think he's a little bit more realistic on how most of us would have been. Just look at how pop stars are.
Yeah, with any of these characters we talk about, they're always when we're looking psychologically at them, they're the different levels. There's what they mean to the viewers, what they mean at the meta level, and what we tend to talk about is what's going on psychologically as if they were people. Kal-El of Krypton 71, who's had a lot of thoughts today, weighed in at that macro level. If Superman is the embodiment of our hope, Homelander is the personification of our fears, the fear of unbridled power, amorality, and ultra nationalist fascism.
I like that.
Well, what I do like about what they did with Homelander at the macro level is sort of address the result of 40 years of continued privatization of our culture and ethos. And basically what I loved about the show was, okay, what happens when you privatize heroes? Well, what they're basically doing is making a comment about our culture, not just Homelander, but all the people who follow him, all the people who are vulnerable to the social media things that lead them to follow, that sway their opinion. So for me, yes, Homelander was the center, but it was also just as much about the culture that he was in, I think they were trying to reveal.
Absolutely. I think especially with the memes and social media, right? Like that is very sharp turning point for Homelander, where he was all kinds of evil and narcissist before, like he wasn't great. And then when what's her face? Stormfront introduces all the memes and everything, right? Suddenly it's like, oh, this is what people like. Okay, great, whatever, right? And he doesn't even have values. And I think that is the saddest part of that, is the failure of his character. He has no fortress of solitude to go back to check in with himself. He doesn't have healthy, like unconditionally loving parents who, help him figure out his own values. It's just, is this what buys me love? This, right? And then he just goes in whatever direction that is, no matter how racist, toxic, terrifying, world ending that is.
So it's interesting. I full disclosure, I haven't seen the Homelander that's from The Boys.
Yeah.
Yes. So my apologies for all the spoilers. I hate spoiling. Okay.
It's all good. But what's interesting is what I'm gathering is that he's sort of bad to the bone, if I may, right? That's sort of his nature, right? If any of you have read Irredeemable, that sort of is, I believe that was Mark Waid. But the arc was basically if Superman went bad and what would drive him there. And this was before DC did it. But they sort of, so it starts with this idea of, well, actually from the very beginning he's evil, but then it kind of goes back and says, okay, well, what if you had this pure paragon of virtue? What would tear him down? What sort of traumas would occur to then make him evil? Right. So you get that process. So you've got if we think of Superman as a foil to Homelander, right? Irredeemable would be what would drive people that way. So
That reminds me of one of my favorite storylines, the Injustice storyline.
Injustice.
Yeah.
Yes, the Injustice one, where he, Superman's values, he so strongly believes in them that they're used to. He's so human that when what happens in the first couple pages of Injustice happens, he becomes enraged, and it's taken to the extreme. So I think you have two ways to make two ways to make Superman.
You and Travis, oh my god.
Well, they played with a little bit of that sort of him taking his sort of values or desires for control to the extreme towards the end of the Dan Jurgens era. Where they did this arc that I really wasn't, I don't know, sort of I had mixed feelings about, but he basically becomes hyper vigilant, right? So he starts thinking, okay, he doesn't sleep at all, and he's like watching all the monitors in the solitude, almost obsessively to try
He
and
became
catch.
Batman.
Huh?
He became Batman.
So,
Yeah.
but yeah, he's like, I want to stop people from breaking the law before they do it, right? And it was just this very almost anxiety disorder moving in that direction. So
Hydra and Batman.
I was like, Hydra.
Alex Langley, who was also with us last week and is not here this time, weighed in with a different thing people might be fearing, because we talked about the fear of power on those macro kind of concerns. Alex says stories with an evil Superman or Superman stand-in change the very simple message of immigrants want to fit in and help improve their community to immigrants should always be feared no matter how helpful they seem. Batman v Superman plays into that too. Alex says he's not a fan of that message. So thoughts on this?
Yes.
Preach.
Yeah, I
Preach.
love everything about that quote, because that's exactly kind of the problem, right? I think originally Superman was, again, the best of everything, and then very much tied to his, I'm going to say immigrant roots, right? He's literally an alien. You can't get more other than that. And then somehow we have turned him into this symbol of America that fights others. And I have a problem with that version. And I absolutely also have a problem with the version of, or he's this terrifying immigrant alien, and we must fear what we do not know, right? And I think that's the root of all evil. But right, the root of the problem, right, is just because he's an unknown doesn't mean he's evil.
And we're seeing that dichotomy play out today with, Superman is a model citizen. You might call him a model minority, but he still is dangerous. So you should fear him because one small thing could set him off.
He's one of the good ones until he isn't.
That's exactly what it was. I had, we were, with, political stuff that's been going on and everything. And there's someone I spoke to who literally said it is worse for an immigrant to commit a crime than a US citizen to commit a crime. That's exactly what I said. And so, and it is important to listen to what these people are saying in a polite way so that they don't become defensive when you try to re-educate them. And so I said, where's that logic follow from? well, if you're trying to get into this country, then you need to act like an American. And, you know, without going into US history and stuff like that, and probably each of us, there are, you know, 8 of us on here, and we probably heard US history in the United States high school system. Each of us could probably tell you a different way we learned about history. And based on our regions and whatever's going on in school district, but you know, how much money was going into that school district, we already know. So it's a huge fallacy. And even in Man of Steel towards the end, when, you know, the military was Superman is trying to let the military know he can't control them. And then his final say so was, I was born in Kansas, how much more I was raised in Kansas, how much more American can you get? And I'm like, are those the epitome of the American values? Kansas. I don't know who's all been to Kansas, but I don't think it represents every region of our country.
Well, just like any location, there's the idealized idea of that location, and then there's the realistic socio-political and economic parts of that location. And you know, and luckily we're seeing more and more stories, more and more artists acknowledging that the era that Superman was created in and really had those defining characters forged in, those were different times.
Yep.
But how would that same character react to current socio-political issues?
There's some really good history type books on the history of Superman and sort of how he has changed, and how in like the first couple decades he was very much a champion for the oppressed. And
can I just chime in real quick to add just to that piece? There were PSAs, and now I wish I like had a screenshot that I could like throw up here, but there were PSAs of him helping immigrants and saying, be kind to your fellow humans. And so
always.
Yeah, and it was about the 50s or so when he kind of changed and became more of a sort of establishment, the truth, justice, and the American way, the way that I think this sort of Kansas-y thing that you're talking about comes. And then interestingly, within the last 10 years or so, there was a period of time when he actually renounced a very controversial storyline where he renounced his United States citizenship. There are things he wasn't happy about, and he wanted to become sort of a global citizen, right? And so his identity seems to change.
Yeah, I think for me, some of this history of Superman, we can sort of experience as the history of whiteness and power. And, you know, I think in the end, that's really what the boys went after, tried to expose, not just at the level of a privatized white male hero, but the entire culture it takes to sustain that type of a world. And I'm personally thrilled that we're talking about diverse takes on goodness, diverse takes on power, because my take is when someone tells me they know what's good and starts speaking in absolutist terms about it, that's a dangerous space, because what they're doing is constraining the space I can be good in. And so for me, if we're going to talk about Superman now, it would be the ultimate sustainer of otherness and celebration of diversity, right? And how do you do that? And how do you do that when you never know if you're right? Right? That's the thing. Superman always wrapped himself in the garb of doing the right thing, being good. And I just don't know that that's the time we live in right now. So he would be up for the ambiguity. Or she would be up for the ambiguity, right?
Well, and that's where The Boys has a really good, because I don't know if any of you guys have seen Black Mirror. They had a really interesting episode on that too, with the social media and how, and even me having teenage kids and stuff like that, and their self-esteem and their value is based on how many likes or clicks, whatever you get. And it seems that the value, and that's part of the maybe capitalism, has to do with productivity, you know, and so it's all about quantity rather than quality. And because there's an evolutionary benefit, I guess, with social acceptance, right? So that's the human side to us. And something or someone like Superman does not need that to survive. And it's literally the Earth's sun that's given him these superpowers. Back in Krypton, he's just a regular guy like any of us, right? And that's something that we have to remember. But with the Homelander and his fear of being drawn by this social acceptance, it just kind of what's heartbreaking, not just for him, but for all of us, the collective consciousness, if you will. We are all vulnerable to the threat of not being accepted and liked and admired. And I think that comes from something a lot deeper than that, which is, you know, how do we gain our sense of purpose and fulfillment with that relationship with ourself kind of mirrors
I'd
on
like
a
to
micro.
Based
contrast.
off of what Asher was or Dr. Johnson was saying, I kind of want to shoot a question to Travis and Dr. Petersen in terms of
Which
how we
Travis?
regained that.
The one above you or the one to the side of you?
The one,
You're talking
Okay.
our military folks or what?
the military folks.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
All right.
These two.
Well, oh, wait, Harpreet, did you have something else to say on what we were already on before we go to that?
I had I kind of forgot about it.
Okay,
So-
Billy, you go with your question.
My apologies.
'Cause I still got to
Yeah,
get to audience comments.
Oh,
Ooh.
just really quickly, because we've been talking about it in terms of culture, immigration, Superman being from Krypton and whatnot, but I also see a lot of veterans identifying with Superman, especially when they have to be invincible on the battlefield or on deployment, and then they come home and they have to be Clark Kent again. So
Go
Living
ahead.
with a bunch of Loises before he came out. Yes.
I'm going to jump in on that and say that Superman does not express toxic masculinity, right? In other words, Superman reflects upon the violence that he wreaks upon the world. He experiences the guilt and the suffering of the people he's harmed, but he still harms them because for a bigger good. When we have young men and women from this country out on a battlefield, I don't know that we're actually asking them to introspect on the space they're in. To the opposite, they're trained to just suck it up. And that sucking it up is what emerges in well, I'll just stop there.
Well, that's why they issue us straws to suck it up. But when we're walking out there, that does relate to us on the back side. I did 10 years in the Marine Corps, and it was tough being out there because you can't show vulnerability, you can't show weakness, all these things. But kind of going with what Billy was talking about with Superman, like we all feel like we're invincible. Nothing can harm us. And then we hit that piece where something bad happens to one of us and we feel it tremendously. I was talking to actually Angela about this morning, and she was talking about some stuff she's been doing recently.
Yeah, so I've actually been taking like internal family systems therapy, where you are really engaging with the different selves that you have inside in terms of thinking about, like, there's always an inner monologue. And some people really do have a sense of like, there's a very protective superhero part of them that steps in to either protect others or even protect more vulnerable selves at times, sometimes almost to a detriment. So I was actually working with someone this week, and she has a really difficult history of trauma in childhood, and had to protect a younger sibling, and so has this very strong like superhero. And she was just like, just steps in, protects no matter what, and it's just very, very dominant character. And so that it was interesting to kind of hear the idealization of what that protector and hero means. So to go back to Billy's comment, it's like, I think veterans especially can struggle with, there's no aspect anymore when they return and go to civilian life for that hero anymore. That is no more, there's no place for that, at least in terms of that purpose.
And we displace emotion, right? We get rid of that emotion piece, and they go back to, and I've had this plenty of times with Superman as an example, is like, I had to be strong, I had to be invincible. I was like, well, is Superman invincible though? Like, we all have a weakness, if not multiple colors of that weakness, right? So and by cracking that logic just a little bit, they start to open up room for more and more emotional healing.
I think also talking about, speaking of vulnerability, the thing, oh yes, thank you,
Nice.
thank you,
Yep,
thank
there
you
it is.
so
Thank
much
you,
for finding
Wizard.
that. That makes me so happy.
Mhm.
Okay, Travis, yes. What you were saying, right? I think it's about that sense of belonging and that sense of finding purpose within that. And then as long as it's attached to a value or, what he's actually fighting for, it makes sense. But the second that that's taken away, there should, in theory, be something to fall back on. There should be that something that, oh, this is what I was fighting for, right?
I,
And
know I do want to say we're coming up on the hour. And but I want to Justin Bernstein or Bernstein, whichever you pronounce it, had a comment, and we've got other comments from people. We can get into those in the post show. We always record when we keep talking anyway and put it on our Comic Confusion channel. But Justin Bernstein commented about there's a trend where Superman turns authoritarian once Lois dies. There are a number of different stories in which this goes on, like Injustice. Do you think, and he used other examples, do you think this puts too much of a burden on Lois Lane as a character to be his moral center? I'm restraining from answering myself. Panelists, what do y'all think?
Well, it is too much pressure on any one person to be another savior. I mean, it's what I'm going back to earlier about our toxic individuality, our toxic individualism, right? If our empathy were a little more built into our cultural infrastructure, I think that perhaps the burden wouldn't be so much on an individual. The culture would be more moral, dare I say.
I think it's just anti-Superman too. Like Scott, you keep bringing up how this is not a man with toxic masculinity, and yet the love of his life dies, which we can all relate to. That there would be a period of darkness for each of us and grieving and everything like that. And while it might show that everyone has their breaking point and stuff, the thing that we love the most about Superman is that through his breaking points, whatever, he still finds a way to come out on top of everything. And while it's interesting in entertainment, the whole Injustice thing or Superman gone evil because Lois died, in many story arcs, she's gonna die. He's gonna outlive her. And so I feel very torn about it. I don't get as excited about, or if I don't feel as interested about the story arc where he turns evil because Lois died. And maybe because of what Scott said, no human being can be the saving grace for anybody.
Well, and I think
I
that's
think
what.
it's natural to give him an opportunity to have a grief free fall, though. Like, I feel like
Yeah.
that's totally fair, right? And eventually he finds his way back through XYZ means. But I think Superman is like, that's the whole point, right? He doesn't have to be toxic positivity. He can be multifaceted and human and have those vulnerabilities.
Angela, were
but
you
he was
going to add something? Angela?
That was pretty much what I was going to say is that that just adds an extra dimension. I think it makes him a little more story arcs like that, I think, are specific to making him seem just a little bit more accessible. Like the way we started this whole thing was talking about like he's an aspirational character. And I think sometimes that's without like just outside of our own reach. And so like my favorite pieces of any Superman story are always the ones where I'm like, yeah, that's me. I would do that, or like where he actually struggles and it's dark and it's gritty and his reactions where he makes mistakes, like his red kryptonite experiences and like what he does under those circumstances is just like, and but then how he gets through it is what's
Right.
really inspirational to me.
Well, and I think that's why it's so important to have, not just, I appreciate the point about, putting this all on Lois, right? Why it's important for him to have a social support network, like his earthly parents, like, in later iterations of the Justice League, where they all know each other's secret identities, right? And so they can all share their frustrations and their struggles with each other later on, right? So it isn't just one person. You start to have more of an interdependent village to help with that.
And if he
And he
had
was
the
good before Lois.
if he had the good upbringing that we're saying he did, that means he's seen people grieve at funerals, right? He has seen people live through these emotional torrents of being an adult human. And so since he's experienced them like day in and day out in a life, they've modeled how to deal with grief for him. So that matters.
All right.
Yeah,
Asher and Travis have both had things, but we've got, and Asher had a really good point. He was good before Lois, but we've got to wrap it up here in the Wizard live stream. We'll keep recording. We'll go through other comments people have made, and I will. We tend to talk over other even more and get sillier during our after stuff. But so all of you, remind them who you are and where anybody can find you online. I am at Superherologist on Twitter. Just look for Dr. Travis Langley on Facebook, some Instagram. Eric, who are you, and where can people find you?
So you can find more information about my research interests and background on the Department of Psychology's webpage at Illinois State University. You can also find me at Eric Wesselman on Twitter. And I have a psychology and film blog called Film Culture, Cult, all caps.
Great. I am Dr. Harpreet Malla. You can find me at Shanty Orange County, which is where I practice. But you can also find me in my role as the diversity chair for LAGPA, where I talk about stuff like this all the time too. And you can email me if you would like at Harpreet, HARPREET, .MALLA at shantyoc.org.
Thanks. You can find out about my research interests at the Illinois State University Department of Psychology webpage. I also run a YouTube channel called Dark Loops Productions, where we talk about live life, science, art, humanities, and all thing nerdy. So, and on Twitter at @dark_loops.
You can find me some of these books that Dr. Langley has been the lead editor for, and on Twitter at @themarine_peer, PEER.
And you can find me. I'm just now getting onto the social media stuff with this stuff at Twitter at SHRedemptionTX for treatment, or Instagram at Dr_Asher_SRT, or Facebook Asher.Johnson.superhero redemption.
Mail me at dr.angela.
Your sound dropped. Can you lean closer to the mic?
Now?
Yeah.
Better?
Okay.
All
yeah.
right. I was like, okay, dr.angela.petersen, PETERSEN @gmail.com. And I'm also new to Twitter. So at Dr.Dr_Squirrel Girl, all one word.
Oh, I like that. Billy, who are you?
I'm Dr. Billy San Juan, and if you want to support me, anytime you hear any microaggressions or if you see anything against the Asian American Pacific Islander community, please be your very own Superman or Superwoman. Step in and help out.
Speaking of that, 2 weeks from now, we'll be talking about Asian representation. Next week, it's WrestleMania breakdown, which I don't know anything. Billy knows plenty. We're gonna, and you know what? We've got hero narratives, and we can definitely tie it to the themes we've been doing along the way. I thank you all.